Hey there. Thanks for joining us for Tales of Misadventure, a podcast all about business blunders. On this podcast, Nicole Donnelly, founder of DMG Digital, talks to entrepreneurs and learns how they turn their lemons into lemonade. DMG Digital is a content marketing agency focused on helping manufacturers attract new buyers through digital self-serve. Nicole Donnelly is a fourth-generation entrepreneur, a girl mom, and an avid traveler. Now, let's head into a tale of misadventure with your host, Nicole Donnelly.
Hello, and welcome to Tales of Misadventure, where we talk to entrepreneurs and have them share their business blunders and how they turned lemons into lemonade. Today, I am so excited to be joined by Tony Martinetti. Tony is the founder and chief inspiration officer for Inspired Purpose Partners. Tony's doing extraordinary work as a business coach and leader. He's a TEDx Talk speaker and has written several books. And we're really excited today to talk to Tony about his latest book that he's written, which really dives into the stories of our past and how our past experiences, how we can integrate them into our current present state and use those past experiences to help us make those important pivotal changes in our lives. So I'm really excited to have Tony talk about that and share some of his experiences. So Tony, welcome to the show today. How are you?
I'm doing great. And thank you so much for having me on the show. I feel like this is a perfect place to be to talk about our past and our stories and our tales of misadventure, which I just love. It's so cool. Yeah. And I love that we've gotten to know each other over the years and you do such great work. So thank you.
Yeah, thank you. I remember, I'll never forget the first time that we met. It was actually on a live event, and I believe it was on St. Patrick's Day. I can actually remember what I was wearing. I was wearing this bright green shirt, and we were celebrating St. Patrick's Day. And I think we might have played a little Van Morrison to intro the show. And I got to say, that was one of the most just thoughtful and poignant conversations that I've ever had on a live show. And I was just so inspired by you and just what a thoughtful leader that you are. And in particular, there was one part of the show that I just loved where you talked about change and tradition. And so I'm excited to talk to you about that a little bit. That's one thing that I'm very passionate about, is helping people navigate through digital transformation, e-commerce, et cetera. And it is so, so challenging to get organizations. It's challenging for us to change as individuals, let alone trying to get whole teams and organizations to embrace change in those really meaningful ways. So, and I'll never forget what a wonderful conversation we had. So I can't wait to dive into that today. So cool.
Absolutely. And of course we had a lovely partner in crime, Kurt Anderson, who is just, he's just full of so much energy and positivity. So
true. Yes. Yeah. Just a breath of fresh air and just always bringing out the best in people. So, well, let's go ahead and get started. So as I was preparing for the show and thinking about, questions and everything, I just think that one of the things I really love about you, Tony, is that you live your life with such intentionality and such purpose. And you really encourage other leaders to do the same, to really understand who they are, what drives them, and to make sure that they're living authentically to that. And so I wanted to just ask you, what is it that is your why? What is your purpose? What is it like, if you were to come up with a statement of why you do what you do and what you see as your life's purpose, what would you say?
Yeah, I love this question because it gives me an opportunity to share a part of me, which I don't often get to share. People don't know that I was an artist as a child, and oftentimes, I think of myself as an artist now. It's an identity that I want to own more fully, even though I'm only dabbling these days. But when I think about my why, my purpose is really to help others to find the masterpiece inside of them and to create the space for them to reveal it. And, I feel like that's something that I've done for myself and in continuing to do so. But I want that for other people because I feel like so many of us are hiding some brilliance inside of us that just is dying to get out. But it's hidden by a lot of these things that get in the way, limiting beliefs or societal elements of, this is what you should be doing and this is how you should be showing up. And so for me, it's about listening and really seeing through all of the stuff on top that is basically covering up that masterpiece.
That's so beautiful. Your purpose is to help other people find the masterpiece within that. That is such a beautiful, like that gave me the goosebumps. That's so inspiring to me. It's certainly a journey that I'm on, I think. So what are some things, like just thinking about that? How did you mentioned looking inside. What are some things that you had to do on your journey to identify that masterpiece within you? Like, how did you get in touch with your inner self and really have the discernment, which requires a lot of discernment, I think, and courage to be able to first
Yeah.
recognize and then two, make the change, right? How did you come to that point?
I think it's a cycle of discernment and courage. It's not like one starts and then the other ends. It's like you constantly have to go through that. You have the courage to take the first step, and then you have to be able to say, hey, like, what does this mean? How do I really dig deep into this and figure out what the meaning of all these things are? And then come back to taking a courageous step and experimenting with what you learn. And then, go deeper again. And I think that has really been the journey for me is this sense of like finally deciding enough is enough. I have to live a life that fulfills me and not just a life of just getting by and just, just living, I guess, but not really, having a life of purpose. And so when I started to open my eyes a little wider and see that there's more to life than what I was having, I decided to ask more questions of myself and others. And through that process, a whole new world started to open up. And that's one of the things that people reflect back on me when I started to coach them and work with them. They said to me, like, every time I leave a conversation with you, I feel expansive. And I'm like, okay, whatever that means. Well, yeah, I mean, now I understand it better. I help them to see new possibilities in themselves because I get them to see that they're stuck in a pattern.
I love that. What are the signs that you noticed in yourself and maybe signs you see in other people's that they're stuck in that pattern?
Yeah. Well, now that we're on this art theme, I mean, there's a sense of like gray drabness. I can't even say, can't talk today. Not a good thing. But when you start to see the color in your life not really there, you start to feel like you're just going through the motions, and you don't feel a sense of like inspiration or kind of something you're looking forward to in your life. Then you start to realize there's something going on here that I'm missing. And I often do this with my clients where I say, like, when you look at the week ahead and there's something, if you don't have anything in your calendar you're looking forward to, then you're starting to get into a pattern of stuckness. You should have something on your calendar, even if it's the worst week that you have ahead of you. You should try to have something planned and take action to plan something that gets you excited, that you look forward to, because that starts to put you in the right path for you. Yeah. And you want to bring some color back in your life. And often say, lighting, what lights you up. You have to find out what lights you up and bring more of that in. Yeah.
Oh, that's so beautiful. So I will tell you, like, what you're saying really resonates with me. I have been, over the last several months, kind of really grappling with some of those same questions about where do I want to take my business? What is it that I'm really best at, right, within my business? And as your business grows and things change, or as it shifts, you find yourself in like kind of like these pivotal moments where you're like, okay, what's my new role in this business, or what do I want my role to be? And it can feel a little scary. And then it kind of as a business founder, like, it causes me to reflect, like, is this what I want to be doing in the business? Is this the kind of business that I want to be in? So I've been on that same journey where, like, I've full transparency and authenticity. I've looked at some of my weeks and I'm like, is that how I'm spending the time the way that's really filling my soul, And so one of the things that I challenge myself to do, and I love how you mentioned art and how you're an artist, is to specifically make time, like one day a week, for curiosity. Like every Friday I go out and I find something locally, whether it's going on a hike a place I've never been, or going to an art museum just to experience art, or something that like fuels that curiosity inside of me, because that's how I'm wired. Like, I like to see and experience new things. People are wired differently. It might be different for someone else, but for me, that curiosity really like fuels me and kind of lights me up. And so I've noticed that as I've been doing that, it kind of like helps me to get more in touch with what are the things I really love. What do you think about that? What are your thoughts on that?
So many thoughts. So many thoughts. I love that you shared that, because there's a few things that come to mind. Number one, I think, we get into these businesses that we have a lot of passion for, especially, entrepreneurs. And I'm not saying that doesn't apply to people who are inside of organizations. The reality is we have so much passion for them. And then we think that, we have to continue to doing the same thing, rinse, wash, repeat, because this is the passion, right? But from time to time, we have to stop and say, oh, wait a minute, like check in with yourself and say, what is the next chapter of me going to be? Because we evolve as well, right? Mm-hmm. And so sometimes you have to take a mini sabbatical and say to yourself, let's check on ourselves and see what's next. What's the next chapter going to involve? Do I need to make a pivot, make a change? Mm-hmm. And sometimes you've got to really be careful not to like throw everything away, because it could be that you are on the right path. You're doing the right things. You just got to make a slight tweak or just continue. Or it could be that you want to take a completely different shift because you've realized, gosh, this is really burning me out and I'm not doing it the right way that I want to do. So I think it's important. And this comes back to a tool I often use with my clients, which is expand your vision, narrow your focus, which is really a powerful way to think about how, oftentimes if I'm being really narrow focused right now, narrowly, looking, I might be looking at a problem just in front of me as just, this is the only path forward. But we have to get expansive and see what else is available to me, but don't stay out there, because if you stay out there, what's going to happen is you're going to get overwhelmed and feel like, well, I should be doing all this. I should be doing that. I should be doing this. But instead, it's identifying potential opportunities that you want to experiment with. And say, I want to narrow my focus now on experimenting with this potential option and give that a go. So I know I went on a tirade there, but I hope that was helpful.
I love that idea too of like expansion, but not it being overwhelming by just focusing on one part of it at a time, rather than feeling like you've got to do all of it. And I remember that I subscribed to your newsletter, and you have such great content. And one of the books that you recommended several months ago was Your Brain on Art. And I'm actually reading that book right now. It's beautiful. And it talks about like the power of how art can transform and heal us, just appreciating art and creating art. So I wanted to talk a little bit, like transition a little bit to that. Like, you're an artist. What kind of artist are you? And how have you noticed art transform you? And is that something like you kind of like bake into your coaching with your clients? Like, what do you think about that?
Yes, and yes, in many levels. I mean, and I see art as not just being just this strict like painting and drawing, which I historically was a painter and drawer, but now I've actually taken into elements of glass blowing, and I've done some work with iron, metal work, which is really fantastic. But I don't have to be perfect at any of this stuff. I just like to play. And I think that's the key that I really I lean into. I can own the mantle of being an artist without having to be, gallery ready and selling my pieces to the world. Instead, it's more for my own sense of like enjoyment and my own insight. And I take a lot of lessons from those things, and I infuse it into my writing, which is also an art. And so using that as a way to connect, when you get ideas from other arenas, like being an artist, you get to use them as a way to connect the dots to another place, like business, or in conversations with people who are not really, they're more analytical. How do you get them to think differently? Is by using other mediums, other fields, to allow them to see a new possibility. So yeah, that's one part of it. And then I also would say that the other thing that is really important is to constantly be thinking about your conversations that you're having. Is how can you create conversations that are not just surface level, but they're deeper. they're actually pieces of art in a way that, like, you're creating through conversation. So that's one other part of this, which is important, is we all have conversations that we feel like we could go deeper. We could see a bigger part of this if we're willing to go there.
That is incredible. I never thought of like a conversation as a form of art. Never. Like that is
Absolutely.
like completely like opening up my whole mind about like the beauty and power and art that is in conversation, because you're absolutely right. Like I think about some of the conversations I've had and the new ideas like this, for example, that have come from those conversations that I would have never come to on my own. So that's really powerful and really, I think, inspiring to think about like conversation as an art form.
Yeah. I mean, when you think about coaching conversations,
Yeah.
there's often a saying that it's co-created, right? We co-create through coaching. It's not one person bringing something to the table and then that becomes like the thing that the other person has to own. Instead, it's about two people having a conversation and catalyzing each other into action. But it's a co-creation process. So that, in essence, says that it's a piece of art.
Mm.
It's and it didn't exist before, and it's a new thing that we've created together, which is really cool. This right now is a piece of art.
And you're right. There's nothing else like this conversation out there that could ever. Oh man, Tony, that is so stinking awesome. That is so cool. You know what it makes me want to do? Have more conversations.
Yes. Yes.
I think, don't you find the art of conversation, it's become a little lost with technology. It's so much easier
Yeah.
for us to just text someone or, and you lose so much of the richness of relationships, I think, that can be had.
Exactly.
That's so cool.
Yeah. And also leaning into the fact that it doesn't have to be perfect. You continue to experiment and play and see what else you can discover by having conversations. So if an artist wanted to be perfect out of the gates, then they would never start.
Let's talk about that a little bit, because I have to tell you, I have a very strong inner critic, and I think a lot of people do. So there are times when I do try and I'm like, I try to journal every day. And a lot of the times when I sit down and I put pen to paper, I'll be honest, that little critic is in there and it's telling me like, it needs to be good if it's not, and what is good defined as, right? But like there's this critic
Yeah.
in me that's like the judger that's like puts a little bit of pressure on you. But the truth is like, who decides what's good or not, and what does it matter whether it's so quote unquote good? But cognitively I can understand that. But what do you do to encourage people to kind of break down that barrier that I think is really common for people, truthfully, people who are very type A, who want it to be perfect, who are very driven and frankly struggle with the releasing that pressure and just being? Are there some specific like tools or like mental things that you recommend people can do to kind of release some of that or get into that place where they can just play, like you said? Like, I can't tell you how much I ache to just play. Truthfully,
Well, it's great. I love that. I mean, I think it's so true. We need to play more as adults because we lose that inhibition of play. And so, I mean, in terms of like tools and ways of doing it, it's more through just giving people permission. Sometimes meditation is a good way to do that. It's just, giving people that space to say, hey, let's just close our eyes and see what happens if we just let go of the world as it is and imagine what it would look like if you didn't have that critic that you have out there, like the art critic. Let's fire him and or her and let them go. And now we can go and do our own thing and create our own little thing in the world. And so I know it seems maybe it doesn't fit everyone. So not everyone I meet is going to be up for that. But for some, it's exactly what they need, is that sense of like permission to say, let's just play. It's not going to show up in any reports or, be on your boss's desk tomorrow. It is just for you to be able to explore. So I think that's the starting point, right? For people who are a little more analytical or a little bit rigid, then I might say, what are you tolerating that you shouldn't be tolerating? Yeah, and it's a different angle, but the reason why is because oftentimes we tolerate a lot in our life that is stuff that we put up with because we feel like we have to be tense, structured. And so I let them kind of let go of some of that structure by saying, like, what if you just let go of what you're tolerating and just, allow yourself to be in control?
Interesting. What's an example of something someone might tolerate, let's say, that they don't that wouldn't be something that they would need to let go of?
Yeah, I mean, a classic example would be somebody who has like a boss who tells them where to be and when, and instead said, like, I'm going to be more in control of my calendar, and I'm going to push
Yeah.
back and say, hey, look, I have to have certain times where I'm going to work on my creative work, and not creative work meaning like work. Maybe it's on long-term projects because you're not making progress on the things that are important because you're constantly being interrupted by your boss or you're constantly being dragged into meetings. So it's
Mhm.
like pushing back and saying, like, no, if I'm going to be effective as a leader, as a person who's going to do strategic work, then I need to have space to do so. And I have to own that. And so tolerating everyone interrupting you, including your boss, is not a good way to allow that to happen. So
I love that. It's like learning to set better boundaries.
absolutely.
And uh, and I think when you do that with it commands some level of respect on their part, right? That you respect
Absolutely.
yourself enough, and then they will in turn respect that you have set up that boundary. That's so interesting.
Yeah, and I'll just share a little story. I remember learning this a long time ago from someone who worked for me, who was a young kid who he's like, well, I do these things every day. I go to play basketball with my friends, and we've been doing this since the beginning of time, like beginning of a long time ago, basically. And I'm like, okay, but what about the reports? And what about this? What about this? And so I was pushing back, and I was thinking to myself, like, no, he understands his priorities. And I think it's really admirable of him to actually say, this is my boundary
Yeah.
and I'm not allowing you to push it. And he did amazing work, which was really
Mhm.
cool. So it'd be one thing if you saying like, no, and not really like giving any kind of leeway. But when I heard him say that, I was like, interesting. There are things in our lives we have to say, no, I'm going to get the job done. I'm going to do what I need to do. But I also have to tell you that I'm going to honor and respect other parts of my life and own that.
Love that. I
So,
remember I had a job when my kids were young, and when I took the job, I told them up front, I said, I would really love this job, but I don't want to work on these during these times because I have little ones at home. Would you be willing to let me, work around that? And they did. And it was really
yeah,
wonderful. I respected them that they respected me in that way. And it was
yeah,
great for my family because I had those hours that I wanted and needed with my kids, and I was still able to do the job. And I think
yeah,
what was really cool is that that example showed the rest of the company and the rest of the people on the team. I think that the leaders valued that work-life balance, and they valued the boundaries that the employees were asking for. So I was really like impressed by the
exactly.
leadership that they were willing to be flexible in that way. And I think that's something as leaders that's really important. When you do that,
Yeah, like
rise.
don't be afraid to be a leader, an example for your own leaders. We often say lead by example, but that doesn't mean that the examples have to be but from the people ahead of us.
Yeah.
They could be from the people they could be from you. And
Mhm.
you could be setting an example for the CEO of your company
Yeah.
by being who you are.
So inspiring for people to hear, I think. You don't need a title to be a leader.
Yes.
Yeah. Well, so
Hmm.
cool. Well, I remember in the episode that we had, the St. Patrick's Day episode, you shared something that has just always stuck with me about tradition. And I wanted to talk a little bit
Mhm.
about that. And that is, how do you balance tradition with change? The rate of change is happening so quickly now within organizations.
Yeah.
And it's only, especially with AI and all of these advances, it's only going to increase more rapidly. So having a culture in an organization that embraces change is so critical, but embracing change, like saying you embrace change and actually embracing change is really hard, because research actually shows there's this bias where anytime someone's presented with something new, the immediate reaction is negative, right? Like it's actually a proven scientific thing that, people are biased in that way to react negatively to change. And one of the things you said in that episode that I loved is, whenever you're going through change, it's really important to maintain that thread of tradition through any sort of change project or management project, which I think was so inspiring. How do you recommend people go about identifying what is the tradition that's worth keeping? Because obviously you don't want to throw the baby out with the bathwater, but you don't want to, so how can people identify the tradition that's worth keeping and keep that through the transformation? That's my first question for you.
I love it. And it really is, when you're asking it now, it's has me thinking about it, maybe not differently, but in different language.
Yeah.
Because with my most recent book, I've been thinking about how connection is the core of everything that I do. And it's connecting with our stories, connecting with ourselves, and then ultimately connecting with others. And so when I think about how people do this in their organizations, it starts with really having a connection to our past as a company, as an organization, and saying to yourself, how do we ensure we know what it is that we're about? What did we get into this business for? What did we start this business? Initially, what was the purpose of our business? And what are we going to maintain as we move forward? While also navigating a change situation, because people need something to hang on to. And so they need to connect with the core of what it is that you are as an identity. So it's kind of like my identity. I connect with the idea of being an artist. And that has something that I hid for a long time because I felt like it wasn't acceptable in the world that I was in. And now I realize that we can own an identity, and we should own our identity as long as we want to, even if we no longer do the thing that we're doing. It becomes part of us. It's ingrained in us. Yeah. But we have to make sure we understand what it is that we want to own and stick with that and say, so if we're a company that says we are all about serving cancer patients, we want to make sure that every cancer patient lives a more fulfilling life, that we add days to their lives and make it a quality life. And we may change what area of cancer development, of oncology we go into, but ultimately what stays the same is that we're going to add days to their lives. Mm-hmm. The challenge that might happen is maybe navigating change might look like, hey, we're having to lay off some people because we've had to cancel a trial, or this trial didn't work out, and that's change that people sometimes will, be like, this is not good. And where are we going? Now we're letting these really important people who have been part of our journey go. And ultimately it's about saying, hey, we're doing what we can to make sure we're navigating to that one thing that's so important to us, connecting to what started us at the beginning, adding days to patients' lives.
That's such great advice that people can apply to their organization and individually, like really asking yourself to connect with maybe the little girl or the little boy, and what was it that really inspired you as a child, and going back and really understanding those things that really lit you up, and how can you kind of identify that and then stay true to that with wherever you're going with your career. But in organizations, too, like this is something that, with one of the accounts I was working with, they decided to invest in a huge e-commerce project, and it wasn't going well. It was not going well at all. And so we had to take a step back and realize, like, do an actual customer needs assessment and ask the customers, hey, what do you value about working with this company? What are the things that you love about it? What is the experience you want to have? What do you expect when you work with us? And we had these really wonderful conversations with them one-on-one to really understand that. And then we also talked to the employees to say, what do you love about working here? What is it that you value that you bring to customers? Yeah. And it was so enlightening through that experience. I was very humbled by it, because I realized that the reason why it didn't work and why we were going about it all wrong is I wasn't listening to what it is that people valued and really holding on to that. And that was that they really valued the personal hands-on customer service they were getting from their sales rep, right? Like that was what the company had been built on. So if we were going to invest in e-commerce, we had to position this not as a threat or a competition to the sales rep, but
Yeah.
like, how can we support them through the process? And so it was just like a really like eye-opening experience for me about like everything you're just saying about how important it is to like really go back to what the company was built on or what you feel like your identity is built on. And whatever change you're going to make, to your point, if you stay true to that, then you're going to be much more successful to get people on board and be excited about the change because they're invested in it. They're a part of
Yeah.
it.
The how can change. It's the why and the core that still is the same in essence until it isn't. And then at that point, you maybe have to make some more systemic changes that, let's look at Blockbuster, for example. That didn't really, they had to go out of business because they had no way to continue to stay in operations.
Yeah.
So,
Oh, well, you mentioned your book. I'd love to talk a little bit more about that. You recently published Campfire Lessons for Leaders, and it was built based on your podcast, I believe, which all about like kind of, you mentioned earlier on the show, integrating your past experiences into the present, so you can navigate through. What was your goal in writing this latest book? Like, what inspired this, and what are you hoping people will walk away once they read it? What are you hoping they'll walk away with?
Well, I'll start with the goal, and I'll just say that like the goal initially was, man, I've had so many amazing conversations with people who just filled me up with so much joy, insights, so much, inspiration. And I wanted to champion them and share their stories with the world. And I know that there's, the podcast is out there, but I wanted to do it in a way that was really going to package it in the right way that really highlighted the themes that showed up for me. And so I started to think about this book as a container for sharing these big lessons for people to transform their lives by looking at their own journey of transformation, but having some people who ride along with them. These stories and examples from people who have been through transformational journeys and have had experiences that are probably not that different than what we go through on a day-to-day basis, and allowing them to be great examples of how to navigate challenging situations, inflection points, or what I call them flashpoints. But realizing that we're all going through these on a day-to-day basis, and sometimes we just need someone else to say, yeah, I get you. I understand that journey. And if you are willing to take these steps, you can do the same thing for yourself. Mm. You can make sense and meaning out of your story, and you can use that as a lever to propel you in the right direction.
There's such a great sense of like connection and community in that. Like, you have like a community that you're building like around this book. That would be so cool.
Yeah. It's funny you mention that. So in terms of community wise, it's not exactly like bringing a bunch of people who are going to be sitting in a room together, but I am doing a workshop that I'm bringing into organizations called Campfires of Connection, which is basically a workshop that allows others to come together, create connection by getting to share their stories in a campfire setting, using some of the frameworks and understandings of the book. So it is something that has been the jump off point from the book. And that it's funny how you write a book and it doesn't necessarily just end when the book is done. It's just the start of really understanding what you've done, and that's where this came from, is this realization that, wow, like this is how the work extends from the book, is by bringing this into the workplaces and helping people to see how their own stories and their collective stories can be an impact. In fact, that's how I end the book, is this idea that when I originally wanted to create the podcasts, which I had no experience with podcasting at all, I had envisioned creating what's called Divergent Minds, Convergent Hearts, which is a space for different thinkers to come together and then get to know each other and leave feeling connected at the heart.
Yeah.
And so now I think the time is for, in different branding, Campfires of Connection is basically that. Yeah. But it's basically creating our own little campfires of connection to allow others to come together, share stories, share ideas, and help each other feel connected more, which we need more of in the world.
We absolutely do, especially with more and more people remotely working. Organizations don't have that like physical place where they can, I mean, there's something about physically being in the room with someone that you care about that just,
Yeah.
it's the sensory experience. I don't know how else to explain it or to describe it, but there is a connection that comes when you can see and feel and hear and smell someone that you care about or that you're working with. That is just, there's no words for it. You can't, there's nothing
Yeah.
that can replace that. So, and as we have become more separate in that way, like we are craving that more than ever. I got to tell you, I mean, like
Yeah.
I was so thrilled to go to conferences and actually be in person with people last year, and just to actually, and it just cements that connection you have with each other in that relationship. So I think it's so beautiful that you're going to bring that into the workplace, because you're absolutely right. We need that as humans and as organizations to help us be able to do better work and to live more creatively and work more creatively. So that's super cool.
Yeah, and I love that you mentioned that the sense of like being in person with people, and it's so much more than just the talking. It's the physicality of it all, and being able to hug somebody you've been interacting with online for maybe 5 or 6 years and you've never met in person, and you're like, oh my gosh, you're a real person.
Yes, exactly. So true. Oh, I love all of that. You mentioned that there's a framework that you've noticed for people that are kind of going through these flashpoints and trying to like integrate their past selves with their kind of like current and future. Can you give us a little sneak peek or maybe like a little teaser about like this framework so people might want to be like, ooh, that'll, what's like a little nugget we can hold on to that will help us understand a little bit more about this?
Yeah, I mean, I'll give you a little bit of a taste, because it's there's a lot to it than just kind of a simple framework. But I mean, the starting point is to have the lens to look at things. You want to start by entering your the view of how you're looking at your stories as, there's a 3C framework, which is curiosity, compassion, and connection. And so curiosity, about getting curious about what it is that has made you the person you are today, and what are some of the things that you've overlooked? What are the things that you may want to have another look at along your journey? Compassion. Don't judge yourself. Like, we talk about imperfection, and our journeys through life are nothing short of imperfection. They could be defined as imperfection because that's what makes us human. So by way of that, be compassionate about your own journey, the flaws, the things that you've stumbled. Those stumbling blocks have helped you to learn. When we take leaps into new things, we learn. We leap to learn, and that is part of becoming who we are. And then the third C, connection, is it's not just about connecting with others, but it's also make the connection between what you're seeing and what you are experiencing. So how are you seeing a connection between what you've discovered and what you're experiencing? So maybe there's something you might notice about how you're showing up today that you've now seen is part of what you had experienced as a child. What I've seen through a lot of the stories that I've discovered through the people in my podcast and beyond is that a lot of the little things have been planted in us as children. Well, one of my guests, Jeffrey Shaw, who you might know, Jeff, he's been he's been self-employed since day one. He's used to sell eggs on Sundays and Saturdays. And as a child, and then he, eventually now he's self-employed. He's never been employed by anybody ever. So it's really remarkable. And in his stories in the book, it's really fascinating. But I think it's interesting when you think about how like the things that you did when you were younger, they stick with you throughout life.
So true. I mean, I got to tell you, I love oysters. I am obsessed with raw oysters on the half shell. Okay. And not a lot of people are. I got to tell you, I have very few family or friends that will enjoy the immense pleasure that it is to have a raw oyster from Prince Edward Island or like the Pacific Northwest. And whenever I eat an oyster, I try to explain this to people because they're like, it's just this big slimy piece of snot. Like, how can you enjoy this oyster? And I have to tell you, like, it is every time. I grew up in Southern California, so I would go to the beach all the time. And I tell you, every time I eat an oyster, it takes me back to my childhood, and I feel like I'm at the beach playing in the water, just like, oh my gosh, I'm getting emotional, like just being free,
It's
you
awesome.
know? So like every time I eat that oyster, it takes me there. And it's like a very like emotional experience for me, you know? And it's even
That's
more
wonderful.
cool when I get to experience it with other people who are like really into, like it's a social thing. So I
Yeah,
totally love and identify with the fact that we do have these childhood experiences that really like they stick with, I mean, clearly they
absolutely.
stick with us and they inspire us. But are you an oyster person?
Oh, yeah,
Yes.
absolutely. I'm in the Northeast, so of course we
Okay.
have the
You and I,
best
we're going to
oysters
have
here.
oysters together someday. We're going to meet in
Absolutely.
person. I'm going to give you a big hug and I'm going to enjoy that, like being in person with you. And we're going to sit down and have raw oysters on the half shell. And it's going to be amazing.
Bring it. Bring it on.
That'd be amazing. Oh my gosh. So I just can't wait for the people listening to be able to read this book that you've written. It's, you know, it's something that I know that has been a passion project of yours for many years with all the guests that you've had on your show. And I
Thank
bet
you.
it's like so rewarding for you to be able to see it come to life and to be able to celebrate their stories and what an inspiration that will be for so many people. I'm just really excited for you. Yeah.
Thank you so much. I really appreciate it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Man, this has been so much fun. I didn't know I was going to start crying. I should have known that though with Tony, because you just bring that out. Like you have, I
I'm
will
like,
say, like you have this ability to just really, how do I explain this, Tony? There's safety with you. Like people feel like they can be safe and be who they are and just really let down. And that's a beautiful gift.
well,
So I
thank you.
thank you for, you know, bringing that always to every conversation that we have. It's really wonderful. So
I'm gonna have to make that into I put the Barbara Walters, an element of Barbara Walters inside of me. You know, making people cry. You know,
yes.
in a good way.
Who knew? I honestly had no idea I was going to be crying talking about oysters today, but you brought it out. That was really cool. So,
Absolutely.
so I know we only have a few minutes left, but I would love to talk just a little bit. You talked a little bit about how I'd love to end the show and just talk about the fact that we all make mistakes. And that's one of the core themes of the
Yes.
podcast is we all have our tales of misadventure as entrepreneurs, as business leaders. There's always going to be those times we're going to fall down and make mistakes, sometimes big and sometimes small. And it hurts. It does not feel
Yeah.
good. It can be really painful. Do you have any like specific examples of maybe a misadventure in your own entrepreneurial journey, or maybe not even as an entrepreneur, but just in your journey that was a really difficult mistake that you kind of had to overcome and get past? What got you through and what was that experience like for you?
Yeah, I'm going to share one that is, it has a lot to do with holding a grudge with somebody who I worked with. And so I worked with somebody who was super talented. She was so great. And for some reason, the two of us just didn't see eye to eye. And it went on for so long. And it felt like we constantly were at odds. And, you know, it was challenging. It created a very challenging situation because we reported to the same person, and it felt like we were always trying to one up each other, and
Oh, that's
and yeah, it created a toxic environment, and it was tough for me because I didn't want that to be the case, but it just became that. And when I realized is that eventually we started to have a conversation about it and said, hey, look, we've got to overcome this. We've got to overcome this challenging situation. And I thought it was just a one-way thing. I thought it was just me, you know, feeling like, you know, there's something wrong with the way that I was being portrayed by her, or there's something, but it was both ways. We felt kind of like triggered by each other. But what I
interesting.
realized through this whole situation is that once we had a conversation and started to really understand that we're both good people, we both want the right things, and if we just talk more, we could actually overcome that. And it had me thinking about a lot of the things we do today, where oftentimes like we make up stories in our heads about people we see online. We see people who are like, you know, knocking out of the park, or they're, you know, you feel like, oh, I really hate that person for being so great, you know. But the reality is, have you ever talked to them and asked them about like, what's their journey? Who are they? And what are they all about? And hey, maybe they're the next person you're going to collaborate with. So I share this story because I feel like it has this at the center of it all. It's like, stop getting in your own way and start having conversations, the most difficult conversations you can have, because it could be the one that opens the door to the most beautiful relationship you could have.
Oh, that is so beautiful. I think we can all relate to that experience of having difficult relationships in the workplace. Because we all come with different work styles and the way that we see the world and different perspectives. And that's a beautiful thing. It's beautiful, for example, me, I tend to be very macro. Okay. I want to be up here in the sky, thinking about the vision and the big picture. And if you ask me to get down into the weeds, I'm not going to be happy and I'm not going to do it very well, but then there are other people that just like to live down there. Right. And so if you're working with people like that, that's like, and you have that difference, it's hard. Sometimes there can be a tendency to butt heads in all of those different ways. So I think that's such a beautiful example of just like having more conversations, rather than just letting it be that way, I guess. I don't know.
Yeah. Letting it fester, or letting it just continue to be a thing that controls you as opposed to releases you, which I think is an important way to think about it, is that the only person who's suffering is you.
The person who's suffering is you. That is such a great lesson in forgiveness, right? I mean, there's a beautiful quote, I'm going to botch it, about how, forgiveness is not really for the other person. It's for you to feel like the peace and everything. So what a beautiful example. Thanks for sharing it, Tony. This has been such a wonderful, oh my gosh. Can we come into a part two? Will you come into a part two? That'd be so fun.
Oh, absolutely.
Any day. Part two in person with oysters.
Yes, that's happening. I'll bring the oysters.
Yeah, that's so cool. But yeah, this has been such a delight. I just want to thank you for coming on the show. And is there anything that you'd like to share with our guests on something new that's up and coming for you, any workshops or anything that you'd love to talk about before we...
Nothing much. My dogs are excited about something. I don't know, but I will say the one thing I will share is just my website and place you can find me is ipurposepartners.com. I try to shorten the URL a little bit. So I think go check out there. You can find out more about the books, the podcast, and everything.
And they're cheering for you. They're excited too. That sounds wonderful.
But yeah, that's where I'll leave it, is that, come check me out, and happy to have a chat.
Everyone out there, if you get a chance to read Tony's latest book and listen into his podcast, I hope this has just given you a really awesome sneak peek on what an incredible leader Tony is and all the great work that he's doing, just helping people live authentically and intentionally and with purpose, and be able to create and identify their own internal masterpiece. So thank you so much for joining us today for another episode of Tales of Misadventure, where we talk to amazing entrepreneurs like Tony and help them learn, help them share their stories of how they turn lemons into lemonade. And so we look forward to seeing you on another episode of the show next.
Tales of Misadventure is produced, edited, and moderated by Julie Basello with Basello Media. Music by Marcus Way. Special thanks to our amazing guests and the entire DMG Digital team. Visit us at dmgdigital.io to get access to all our podcast interviews and other helpful resources. And if you'd like to get updates on the latest and greatest, please sign up for our email newsletter. We'll see you next time for another episode of Tales of Misadventure. Until then, keep falling forward.